Welcome back to ModCons. Today I'm joined by Alan Halsall, responsible person for Vote Leave, entrepreneur and owner of Silver Cross. Alan Halsall thought his work was over when the country voted to leave the EU in 2016. Unfortunately for Alan, what followed was a 4-year battle with the Electoral Commission and an example of lawfare in action. He has now put his story into a book, Last Man Standing. Alan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much for asking me. Delighted to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. So Alan, you were the responsible person for the Vote Leave campaign. What did that entail?
Well, basically, in a very basic form, it's like an agent in a general election, an agent who looks
Right.
after the candidate. I was responsible for signing off the accounts, signing off the expenditure, and ensuring that people who gave us the money weren't Russian bots or anything like that.
Right.
They were all legitimate people. So my responsibility was to ensure that the finances, both coming in and going out, we had a £7 million amount we could spend because we were the selected campaign for Vote Leave, for the Leave side. So we could spend 7 million. We couldn't spend more than that.
So obviously, as we all know, you got the result you wanted. The country voted to leave the EU. So it should have all been wrapped up after that. What went wrong?
Well, it's where do I start?
Yeah.
More to the point, what went right? I mean, I suppose I actually say that the biggest mistake that the Vote Leave campaign made was to win, because of course what went wrong was that we upset an awful lot of people, and basically those people were, in my opinion, fairly establishment figures in the civil service, probably in the media, and probably in the judiciary. And a result of upsetting them, they seemed fairly determined over the next few years to prove that Vote Leave had cheated.
Yes.
And so I was in the firing line because I was the one signing off the Vote Leave expenditure. And they were insisting that we'd overspent. So it all came down to that. That's what went wrong. It shouldn't have gone wrong like that, but it did, because there was a determination. And I will tell you a couple of things that happened to me later on in this podcast, which indicate to me that there was quite a campaign,
Yeah.
To overturn, if you like, well, not overturn the result, because they can't overturn the result. The result had happened, but have another referendum.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it felt a bit like a concerted effort to try and prove that you guys had acted in the wrong way and overspent, and so that they could use that to try and say, okay, we need to
Yeah,
redo
you
this.
say concerted effort.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good way of putting it. I believe there was a concerted effort. I don't think it just happened. There was a concerted effort, and it started pretty soon after the referendum was over.
Right. So the timing wasn't unsuspicious.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. So in your wonderful book, Last Man Standing, everyone go and get it. Lord Hannon, he is in your sleeve, and he writes a very good blurb. And he said that your treatment by Europhile officials and civil servants was a measure of official harassment, and the process itself was the punishment. Do you agree with that? And do you think that this is the essence of lawfare?
Um, I do agree with what Lord Hannon said. I think that the Europhile officials, civil servants, politicians, who really did not like the result, I think they then started this, what I would call lawfare. I mean, it's a fairly new term, but I would call it lawfare, because what they were doing was they were putting pressure via the legal system, as much as anything else, on someone like myself. So I think it was a process of lawfare, and it became very obvious when the Electoral Commission, the Quango, that was set up, like many other Quangos by Tony Blair in the 90s, in the 1990s, when they really took one side of the argument. They're of course meant to be Electoral Commission, a neutral body, but of course they didn't. They weren't. They took one side of the argument, and I thought that, and the way they treated me and the way they treated Vote Leave was quite appalling, and absolutely, in my opinion, it totally justifies the description lawfare.
Yes. And I guess the thing about this is that they're using taxpayer money to fight one side. It's not quite fair.
Well, I think that's very true. Not quite fair. Yeah, I mean, of course, I mean they use taxpayers' money all along. We had at the end of the referendum, there were sorry, after the Brexit referendum, there were four of us left to sort of close down Vote Leave. We had 6 months when I had to prepare the accounts and the expenditure to give to send back to the Electoral Commission. And in that time, we had no offices, we had no money. We'd obviously spent all our money on the campaign.
Yeah.
And obviously volunteers who'd given us money, they'd lost interest because we'd won. So it was very, very, very difficult. On the other side, you have the Electoral Commission who probably did something like 7 or 8 individual inquiries into Vote Leave, a number of them on the same subject, which of course is not part of their regulatory authority. And spending money was not a worry for them. They used an incredibly expensive firm of lawyers and probably the most expensive barrister, who is still actually working to this day. I think he was working on a major case for the government only recently, James Eadie Casey, who he was QC then, and his earnings are in the millions. And of course, it didn't matter to the Electoral Commission; they could afford it.
Yeah. And there is no limit for how much they can spend. But obviously for you, firstly as a volunteer and then having to use your own money, it's kind of like David and Goliath, really, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's totally like David. It's good way of putting it. Yeah, because I was on my own.
Yeah.
I mean, by the time when they started, I know we're jumping forward a bit, but when they started when they reported me to the police for criminal proceedings, and there was nobody there. It was me on my own. And of course, the Electoral Commission and the state can afford a lot more than an individual.
Yeah. And annoyingly, it's hot. Some of it's your money anyway. Cheek. So you come from a family of businessmen, with both your father and paternal grandfather being entrepreneurs. After first working for the family business, you went on to purchase the pram and pushchair company Silver Cross, saving it from administration and rejuvenating the brand. You said it was a hunch, but it seemed to have been a shrewd analysis from your time as a customer of the brand that the seed was first sown under the last Labour government. Things are somewhat more precarious for the aspiring entrepreneur under this Labour government. What would your advice be to business owners in the UK today?
Yeah, there's no question that we can see this new bill that they're bringing in relating to the rights for employees, national insurance increases, etc., etc. They are not a party that believes in business. As far as I can see, they're a party that believe in the trade union movement and supporting the trade union movement. However, I think entrepreneurs throughout the ages have always had to deal with these sorts of governments. We have to deal with them. We know that by and large, a Tory government will be more favourable to business because they can see the benefits that business does. And I don't know if you know much about the Jobs Foundation that Matthew Elliott has set up, but they are brilliant at telling the country how important business is and how important jobs are. So I think that entrepreneurs will always find ways round the politicians, but I have to say that this Labour government, this current Labour government, I have never known anything like it.
No.
Talking to my friends who are in business, they are absolutely despairing as to what is happening.
Yes, absolutely. And I never really understood the term gaslighting until this Labour government came in, because they're telling you to your face, oh, we love business, we're doing everything right, we want growth, and everything they're doing is working against you. So I do really feel for business owners in this kind of day and age.
Yeah, I as I said, I certainly do as well. I certainly do. And talking to business owners, I live in the northwest of England. Talking to business owners in the northwest of England, it is very, very tough. But entrepreneurs, business owners will work out ways around the system. But it is a shame that they're having to spend time trying to work their way around issues which are being set up by this government. For what reason? I just don't understand what the likes of Rayner and Reeves and others in the government, what they're wanting, and Starmer, of course, what are they wanting? Well, I don't understand why they so much want to hurt business. It just seems, and the way they're behaving with net zero, and the energy prices.
Yeah.
I can't understand it.
No, no, I don't think anyone's quite got their head around what on earth they're doing yet. But I think what the problem is they're fundamentally not the party of business. So they in their head they want to be, but they don't know how to go about it. And they will always be the party of the unions. And talking of unions, your maternal grandfather, he in your book you include a picture of his certificate from Southern Railway, who thanked him for continuing to work in the 1926 general strike. He seems to have been an inspiration to you, and I guess it took a lot of guts. Is this the grit you channeled during the tough times with the Electoral Commission, and perhaps a reason why you wanted to join Vote Leave in the first place? Are you a rebel, or fighting for a specific cause?
I obviously can't see into the mind of my grandfather, but when you read what he did, whether it was engineering at university, followed by fighting in the First World War in the trenches, or taking on or supporting his company in the general strike against against the unions. He's obviously a man of I would say of great courage and an independent thought. And I'd like to think, I think it's Edmund Burke that always says, you to look to the future, you have to go back to the past. And I'd like to think that I have certain traits in his character have come through in mine.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure they have. So also in your book, you remark that Ted Heath's desire to join the EEC, the European Economic Community, was the moment you looked up from the beer you were sipping and the pursuit of the woman you were about to be rejected by and became politicized. I thought that was really eloquently put. You said that the EEC chemistry felt off from the start, and you pointed out the punitive nature of the relationship. Was that an early motivator for your decision to join Vote Leave, or was it more of an instinctive decision in the moment?
No, it wasn't an instinctive decision. No, it goes back. I was at university in the early 70s, where I studied law, and I could never work out how our country, Britain, could be part of a well, they called it an economic union. I was always very cynical. I thought it was going to be a political union. I understood where they came from in the Monet and the 50s, with the iron steel community federation. But for me, that wasn't where Britain was. I was always so skeptical of the Napoleonic law and the sort of the downward force of law, where you're not allowed to do something unless it's specifically allowed.
Yeah.
Where in this country, it's very different. And I also couldn't understand when I looked into the detail of how countries were fined if they breached their budgetary controls, but they weren't fined. There was always a fudge, and to me, that's not the way we are in this country. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. Maybe fudging is a good idea, but for me, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And therefore, I was involved in I Want a Referendum campaign. I used to go around, pushing for a referendum. And we had our own artificial referendums in various towns across the country. Yeah. So I've always been a believer in the UK not being part of the EU. A friend, of course we're European, yeah. love Europe, but not actually being part of a political organization, which I believe the EU is.
Yes. And I think you look at like Georgia Maloney, she's going to the White House to go and talk to Trump, and her hands are so tied, because even if she's got a great relationship with him, she can't really work or move in her country's interest. She's still part of the EU, and anything that they decide will either hold her back or propel her. And it just shows how restrictive the EU can be.
Oh, well, it's incredibly restrictive, and it's protective. And people say, "Oh, well, it's protective, and what Trump's going to do is protective." But actually, there's a slight difference. I believe that the Trump's protectionism is aimed fairly and squarely at the Rust Belt, at improving conditions, bringing back manufacturing, both from a point of view of improving conditions in the Rust Belt, but also from security, particularly with China. Whereas the protectionism in the EU all comes around, revolving around looking after big business, and yes. That's one of the points I constantly make. It's big businesses being looked after. It's big business in Brussels that has hundreds of thousands of lobbyists lobbying for rules and regulations that protect them. I don't know if you only the other day I read that this new carbon tax on imports that is coming in from the EU, which apparently Starmer's looking at for this country. It's pure protectionism. It's protecting their friends. It's a different, in my opinion, route the route that Trump's going.
And I think we're at such an important turning point in history, where we could really, really make the most. Obviously, we had COVID, which slowed us down, and the Ukraine war, but this is the moment we can make the most of Brexit. And it feels very unfortunate that it's in the hands of someone who is so desperate for it not to work.
Well, it's been unfortunate. I think since 2016, it's been. I don't think it's been dealt with particularly cleverly by either the Conservatives or Labour. But now we have an ardent Remainer. I mean, if actually you knew what actually Keir Starmer thought, but I think he's a Remainer. Although what he says and what he does are so different,
very different things.
But I think there's absolutely no chance of a good Brexit coming out of where we are at the moment.
Yes, and I think if you want to know what he thinks, I think in his uni days he wrote a pamphlet called "The Human Face of Socialism." So I think that's probably where he sits on that.
And of course, he's a lawyer.
And
that's where lawfare comes in.
Indeed. So you grew up in Southport. What are your thoughts on the scenes last summer? Obviously, it was a pretty horrific time with 3 innocent girls being murdered, and we saw the riots. Obviously, Keir Starmer had a very strong reaction to those riots, saying it was all about right-wing thuggery, and obviously the riots did overshadow the actual incident itself. Do you think that the motivation for the riots was, simplistic and an outpouring of collecting grief, or do you think it was a layered reaction to an unfinished Brexit and an increase in immigration? What are your thoughts on the area as well?
I think it's a bit of everything. I think it's everything you said there. I think it's a bit of all of it. I think it's unfortunate, and I only read this a couple of days ago, that the police in Liverpool were advised by the local Crown Prosecution Service not to give any information out. I don't quite know why they were given that advice, and certainly the police are saying it came from them, and that's why. Because I think if there'd been more information, more open information, then I think it would have been it could have reduced the incidents, the terrible incidents that happened. And obviously, coming from Southport, it's a complete and utter tragedy. Nothing like it's been seen before, and I really hope that nothing like it will be seen again. But when I see how some of those rioters and some of the people that wrote, just not a rioter, but I think there's a lady who just wrote something on, and it was pretty nasty. I gather what she wrote, but what was it? 30 months in prison,
right?
I do struggle. To people say, it's awful to say 2-tier policing, but actually, I think there is 2-tier policing. I'd question why there isn't the policing of the marches in London to anything like the extent that we had. There doesn't seem to be anything like the policing. And do you know what I think it's to do with? I think it's fear. I think the police are frightened. I think they're frightened, and it's much easier to go after an Alison Pearson, or a lady who is Alison Pearson, the journalist, or a lady who writes a stupid and probably awful tweet. It's easier to go after them than it is to tackle and the problem is, therefore, that people do think there is 2-tier policing. I think there's 2-tier policing in this country, and I think it's very, very obvious, and you can see the mess that we're in now with the prisons, which is going to get worse and worse and worse.
I think we definitely do have 2-tier policing, and to kind of suggest otherwise just shows that you've kind of got your fingers in your ears and your eyes shut, and you're just trying to la it away. I think with the this situation with the Twitter, I think it's bizarre that someone can be put in prison for over a year for a tweet.
Over 2 years.
2 years for a tweet, and we have a Labour MP punching one of his constituents and being in prison for I think 2 days. It's just ridiculous. And also, you know, in London we're seeing like very violent, aggressive protests in the streets. And I do think it does have a lot to do with who our police and crime commissioner is for London, but also a kind of lack of, you know, like you say, bravery to call things out as they are. I think even with yesterday we saw the ruling at the Supreme Court about a woman being a woman. I think people kind of have a sigh of relief in a way because it's clear, it's decided. And I think we might need to get to that stage with, you know, rioting and race riots and free speech and the policing system, I guess, to have some more clarity around that.
I totally agree. But you used a word which I think is sort of bravery. I don't think there's a bravery amongst many of our politicians, certainly not the current lot in power. I think they're frightened. I think they're frightened. They're always frightened of being called racist. They're always frightened of the reaction of the country. They believe that we have a multicultural society, and as far as they're concerned, that is that is the shrine on which they worship. And if anybody sort of opposes that position, then God help them, they will not be given an easy ride.
Yeah. I think the problem is multiculturalism is important and it is great. And I grew up in a country that was multicultural, but it was a country that was very well integrated. And I think that is the thing we're missing. And I think because obviously a lot of MPs have their constituents, they're at the mercy of their constituents and voters. They might be scared to say that, but it is important. I think Kemi's doing a lot of work in trying to talk about the fact that we need to have integration, and anyone coming to the country should seek to want to be integrated in our culture.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So talking of Brexit, you made a clear distinction between Leave.eu in the book, funded by Aaron Banks and fronted by Farage and Tice, who wanted to join forces with the Vote Leave campaign. You said, based among other things, that Farage wasn't a team player and would put off as many people as he attracted. So Vote Leave decided against the merger. Do you stand by that character analysis of Farage? And do you find the rewriting of history that Farage was fundamental to Brexit frustrating?
That's a long question.
Yes, sorry.
If I can just sort of split it up slightly.
Please do.
Leave EU, they were, if you like, a competitor of Vote Leave because they also wanted to be, as I said at the beginning, they wanted to be the main party or the main grouping to represent the Leave side in the referendum. And as I said to you, we got £7 million to spend. They wanted the £7 million to spend. So they were opposition to us. When we won, they then said, well, come on, let's why don't we all get together? We felt, and I say we, not so much myself, but Dominic Cummings in particular, and Matthew Elliott and others, felt that actually, obviously Farage was the main man in Leave EU, although people didn't know Aaron Banks, and certainly Richard Tice wasn't well known in those days. So it was really Nigel Farage, and we felt that he was sort of a Marmite character, and therefore we had to win 51% of the vote, and we felt that having Farage inside the Vote Leave camp was probably not a good idea. It's better to leave him because he's that Marmite character. He will, 20-25% we felt would always vote for Farage, but not many others, and it would repel others. So that's why we didn't want an agreement with him. I don't know what he's like today. I do know that in those days he was quite, he was always quite insistent. He was the man, and I'm not sure he was a great team player then. I don't know what he's like today. You can see, as you pointed out, I think that Reform have lost one of their MPs, Rupert Lowe. So I don't know. Maybe he is difficult to work with. I don't know. He's, as far as I could see, he certainly always wanted to be the main man on the debates and everything like that. And we, as I said, we felt or Vote Leave felt that it's probably better to, when we had people like Boris or Boris Johnson or Michael Gove or Gisela Stewart, etc. They were probably more
palatable.
Palatable. That's a very good word. Thank you.
No problem. No, but I agree. I mean, if you have Boris, you don't really need a Farage. But Farage is an interesting character because obviously it's like his time to shine now. That he has lost one of his 5 MPs within 8 months. Do you think that he could realistically run a government?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
My view that my view is that no, I don't think he could. I don't think he's. I don't, and I'm not absolutely certain that he wants to be truthful.
Right.
I think I think he's more interested or more aligned to being behind the scenes. If reform and Tories ever do get together, then I don't think he'd be the leader.
Yes. Okay, interesting. So going back to the EU, because you were quite rare that as a business owner, you were not happy with the impact the EU had on your business. Even today, every day we still hear the Lib Dems and Labour politicians and a number of businesses say that closer ties with the EU will solve all of our problems. Why did you not agree at the time, and do you still feel the same today?
I think I said to you earlier that business is not just big business. It's the EU, in my opinion, is a big business organization, a bit like the CBI. And I said to you earlier that there are thousands of lobbyists in Brussels. They're not lobbyists just in Brussels to drink the local wine. They're lobbyists to ensure that the regulations and rules that come out of the European Commission suit them. And that is not always to suit businesses in this country. And therefore, I never have felt that the small business owner. I was involved in Business for Britain alongside actually John Mills, who sadly only died last week. And poor old John and myself, we were joint chair of Business for Britain. We ran small businesses. We went around the country talking to small businesses, and it's small businesses, funny enough, and private businesses, even the larger private businesses who were more opposed to the EU. The EU supporters are the banks, the large pharmaceutical companies, the large manufacturing businesses who can organise the rules for that suit themselves. So I don't think I genuinely don't believe that for business in this country to rejoin the EU, well, it would be a disaster.
And also, I think 75% of our businesses in the country are small businesses, so it just doesn't work.
And they don't export. So we've got to look after our businesses of that size.
Absolutely. So you characterise that 4-year struggle with the Electoral Commission as life at the mercy of the QUANGOCRACY. Talk of the unchecked power of QUANGOs has resurfaced again with the government's recent announcement that they are rowing back bureaucracy by abolishing NHS England. But since being in power, they have created 26 QUANGOs and counting. What is your take on this? Is it a distraction tactic?
You mean the distraction tactic of getting rid of abolishing the NHS? Yes. I think abolishing NHS England should have been done a long time ago.
Yes.
So to me, it's very, very welcome. Of course, I don't believe that the Labour government are reducing the number of QUANGOs. You can see it. You just said yourself. There are more and more QUANGOs being set up. I mean, they come from Blair and the Labour government. They were expanded by, or to be fair to Cameron, I think he did reduce some of the number, but they've expanded since, and now they're expanding further. And the problem I have with QUANGOs, I think, is something that a lot of politicians have with who controls them. Where is a control for them? That's the issue for me. Like the Electoral Commission, where do you go? I had a problem with the Electoral Commission. Where do you go? There's nowhere to go. They have so much power. They've been granted so much power, and it's almost as if the politicians want to give them power. They almost say, "Oh well, let's let them come up with the bad news so that we don't have to do it." But they're giving away what I think is, it's a democratic deficit now, because those QUANGOs don't report in. Well, they probably report into somebody who, I don't know who, very often, the minister, whatever. But they get on. They're given masses and masses of powers to do as they wish, and I think that's a real problem for democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they were given so much power, like you say, so that the ministers didn't have to have dirt on their hands. But it's a double-edged sword, right? And who is, like you say, who is regulating the regulators? I don't think anyone knows.
Well, that's a comment that that John Moynihan, Lord Moynihan, as he now is, it made a comment. You know, who judges the judges?
Yeah.
Nobody really knows, and it's frightening. It's frightening how much power has been given up to, you know, Great British Energy or the Electoral Commission, the one I know about, and how because I hope I'm going to come on to say a bit about how they use their untrammeled power in a way that was very much reminiscent of lawfare.
Yes.
To harass and go for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get on to that. You know, you state that you were a victim of lawfare. It's an increasingly common tool that we've seen used on the likes of Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen. All admittedly have varying degrees of severity, and some might say guilt. But as you and Lord Hannon have pointed out in the book, the process is designed to be the punishment. Is there any way, excluding being elected president, you can see for reducing the length and pain of the process, and you know, what can be done as a UK citizen in this?
Well, the first thing is, I think every Quango ought to be looked at separately, and I know there are hundreds of them, but I think every Quango ought to be looked at separately by a committee in the House, and decide, do we need them, and how can we reduce their role, or can we reduce their role completely?
Yeah.
In the Electoral Commission's case, I have spoken to a couple of very, very knowledgeable constitutional lawyers who say that it can be done. Why did Blair introduce the Electoral Commission? Why do we need them? And the danger with the Electoral Commission and other Quangos is, you know, by and large, they tend to be fairly left wing, the basis of the employees that work for them, and you know, this is just one I know, but I'm sure there are lots and lots of Quangos. Really, are they needed? I'd like to see the whole of the Quangocracy looked at. Do I think it's likely to happen? No.
Yeah.
I think but I think we've got to keep on trying. When I look at myself and what they did to me, it was so disgraceful. It was so appalling that I keep on telling people about it in a hope that we might get some change.
Yeah. And do you think that's what it's needed? Do you think it's a campaign that's needed to be started with, that needs to be started to say, you know, we need to review every single Quango in this country and who they are, you know, reporting to, and why they can do what they do?
I'd like to see the Conservative Party looking at that. I'd like to see them coming up with some suggestions as to how they are going to reduce these Quangos, because these Quangos actually have so much power.
Yeah.
And they use it in such nefarious ways. It is really quite bad for our democracy, as happened with me. And therefore, I'd like to see the Conservative Party really coming up over the next couple of years or whatever, with some real strong plans as to how they're going to, some strong but clever ideas, picking, I don't know, say the top 50 or top 100 Quangos, and actually saying, do we need them? And working out a policy for them, and bringing back some democracy back to our elected politicians, rather than passing it on to unelected bureaucrats and left wing. In my opinion, this might sound pejorative, but they are, in my opinion, they're usually left wing officials.
And also, talking about, you know, who regulates the regulators, I recently spoke with Lord Howard about UK judges and whether they had lost their way in respect of the use of the ECHR in judgments and appeals. And he said that we needed to repeal the Human Rights Act, because he said it brought judges into the area of balancing conflicting rights in a way that should be for elected officials to decide. That kind of goes to what you're saying with it needs to come back to Parliament. Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts on the Human Rights Act, or bringing, I guess...
I think it's been going for years. I don't think this is a new thing. I totally agree with what Lord Howard said. I always remember there's an article in The Spectator some 15 years ago about the increasing power of the judiciary and how we should be concerned about it, and where they're stepping over onto the legitimate decisions of politicians, and so and how obviously using foreign legislation or courts to justify, where it's like the QUANGOs, it's all gone too far.
Yeah.
So, but what's going to happen again? We need a strong Conservative Party who are actually talking about these sort of issues. I haven't heard them yet. I hope we do hear them.
And I'm sure you will. So you recalled in the book that you gave your first big interview for the Today programme when you saved Silver Cross in 2002. And you noted the sad irony that nearly 2 decades later, they broke the story that you had been referred to the police. Do you think that is the problem with the politicised media or politics in general? It's happy to laud people for their achievements until they are politically on the wrong side.
Until they're politically on the wrong side. That's the crucial. But yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, when the Electoral Commission decided to refer me to the police, which, by the way, they had no rights to do.
Right.
The matrix chambers, who are the chambers of Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, wrote a long report about me and about Vote Leave, part of their lawfare plan, and they commented then that it was too high a test, that the Electoral Commission had no reasonable doubt that I had committed a crime, or I had committed a crime before they referred me to the police.
Right.
They never interviewed me.
Right.
They never spoke to me. They never spoke to anyone from Vote Leave, despite the fact they'd said on the Today programme they did. That we'd refused. They didn't refuse. I got all the evidence to show that what the chief executive of the Electoral Commission said on Vote Leave was just not true. It was not true at all. We had offered to give interviews. We were never interviewed, so they had no rights really. They could never ever say, the Electoral Commission, that it was reasonable to assume that I'd committed a crime. Of course, you mentioned about the BBC. I mean, when it came to my name being mentioned, it was and Darren Grimes. We were top of the news item, 7 o'clock on the Today programme, and when the police decided there was nothing, we'd done nothing wrong, it hardly appeared, and it was announced the day before the VE 75 celebrations, on a bank holiday weekend.
Right.
As they say, a good day to bury bad news.
Yeah.
So there's a huge politicization, in particular, of the BBC, which continues to this day. And of course, they are by far the biggest media organization in this country by a long way. So I was definitely, when I talked about Silver Cross some 20 years earlier, I was delighted to tell them about the business. But when they came on with this terrible announcement, the Electoral Commission, which the Electoral Commission had leaked previously to a website, that we were going to be, they were looking at criminal proceedings against myself, which lasted, as I say, 2 years. The police interviewed me under caution, and it was it was an awful time for me. But they had no right. The Electoral Commission had absolutely no right whatsoever to refer me to the police.
Yeah.
And they should never have done so. And they should never, ever have gone on to the BBC Today programme. They had no rights to do that.
It's just outrageous when you think about both institutions, or both organisations are publicly funded, and they're used to kind of attack and go after our own citizens. And there has to be something that we can do, I hope, in the future to avoid something like that happening again.
I never thought when I took on the role of responsible person, I was a volunteer.
Yeah.
I believed in the cause, and I was a volunteer. I never ever expected to be treated by the state. They even used or threatened to use the favorite tool of people who are involved in lawfare, a judicial review.
Right. To
judicially review the police as to why they had delayed so long in getting me to court and prison. And so that's what it concerns me, that this is the lawfare in action.
All of these incredible stories are in Last Man Standing by Alan Halsall. So I have one closing question for you. So we've established that you are a proud Eurosceptic, but are you a Conservative?
I am a Conservative. I am a member of the party. I am concerned, or have been concerned, over the way that the Conservative government worked under numerous prime ministers over the last few years, because I'm not convinced that they've been a Conservative party, a Conservative government. I'm hopeful that Kemi is going to move the dial. I think if I was to give her advice, I think she's got to move forward a bit quicker. I know I read Stepping Stones. I'm sure a lot of people have read Stepping Stones, which related to the time when, after Mrs. Thatcher became leader of our party, and took a number of years to come up with the policies set by Keith Joseph and others in the late 70s. But I don't think we have the same time scale. I think we've got a different time scale because of the Reform Party, and we've really got to move quicker and faster, whether we like it or not. And I'd like to see some real meat on the bones of some policies pretty soon, indeed. I know that's not what necessarily everyone in the party does. And of course, the other issue for the party is that you've still got a big remnant of what I would call the soft left in the party, and I am hopeful that we will have some sort of alignment with Reform in due course, and that some of those soft left who, in my opinion, were in power in the last Conservative government in quite senior positions. I hope that they perhaps would consider moving to the Liberal Democrat Party rather than staying inside our party. But that's my personal view.
And just on that, I know I said it was my last question. Why are you a Conservative?
Why? Because I believe in this country, but I do want to see the state, the size of the state reduced, and I want to see the QUANGOCRACY depleted. So that's why I have a Conservative.
Amazing. Well, you've already given us one good policy to take to Kemi in the policy renewal programme. Well, thank you so much, Alan, for speaking with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Everyone go and check out his book. It's incredible. It talks about your early life, your business career, and the battle with the Quango that was the Electoral Commission. Thank you so much for joining me today, Alan.
Thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much, and good luck with your future podcasts.
Thank you.